is that? Or not? It's not.
That's the police department. Well, we don't park down there at the police department.
Why not?
I don't know. The world of Jesus.
All right, so welcome to the world of Jesus. The exhibit here has around 100 artifacts on display. If you were looking at an artifact in a display case, anywhere in the exhibit, with one exception, I'll tell you in a minute, you're looking at an authentic ancient artifact. The majority of it is on loan from 2 museums or from the excavation project team I work with, or in some cases, a few private collections. So to understand the world of the New Testament, you actually have to understand a little bit of history from the time first. It actually starts with a guy named Alexander the Great. In the 300s BC, if you know your world civ, Alexander was a young man who basically conquered the known world. All right? Can you all imagine a boy in his late teens to mid-20s today being the king of the world? Well, that's who Alexander was. And he had a large impact on the world of the New Testament, even though he's never mentioned. And it's simply this reason. Can you imagine as that entire world is conquered by him and his armies, and it would fracture and break up, but something interesting happened. That known world basically adopted Greek culture. No matter what your original culture was, those cultures become Hellenistic. In other words, they have Greek culture, Greek ideals, but the key is now all those cultures have the ability to read, write, and understand the Greek language, the Koine Greek, the common Greek. All right? We find some examples of the common Greek here on the jar handles of large storage jars used for shipping wine or other goods. The one in the back is Philanu. If you know a Phil or Philip, his name's on the jar handle there in ancient Greek. So that is what we find is that world spreads. Now here's the thing. The one thing, the biggest commodity again, is the Greek language. So then in the Roman era, on our Roman roads banner here, you find a good example of a road. That's a Roman road in Ephesus. And the Romans basically built roads that stretch from one corner of the empire to the other. So now, here's what's interesting. For the first time in history, if you have an important message to spread, you have a language that your entire world can understand, and you have the ability to transport it there. And we see the spread of Christianity. When I think about it, we think of people like Paul and Paul's journeys, and that's what we see. And so when we talk about the timing, it is a time in history where this is now possible. Obviously, the Bible was not written in the King James English. It was written in Koine Greek, all right? And while we have very excellent translations and very good understandings, there is occasions where we have had a little bit of in the English, if we look at the Greek, we get a better understanding. And we're going to talk about one of the most famous stories from the Bible, and it's very appropriate at this time of year, and we're going to talk about the Christmas story. The English effectively says, and there was no room in the inn. And that one phrase we're going to spend 5 minutes talking about. And she laid the baby in a manger. Okay, so we're going to look at the original Greek. The Greek would say, here's 2 words I'm going to change for you into Greek. There was no topos. Topos is the word we're calling room. Now in our English mind, you probably like me, you heard there's not a room. Okay? Topos does not mean in that sense. You would better understand it as space. There's not space for them. And here's the key word in the kataluma. Kataluma is the word in English we're translating as in, which is very curious. The Greek Orthodox Christians who have always read the Greek have never translated that word as in. And here's what's fascinating. That word Luke uses a second time in his gospel. And so he describes Jesus' Last Supper as occurring in a kataluma. Ladies and gentlemen, did Jesus have his Last Supper in a hotel room? No, it's very clear from the text. It's an upstairs guest room in someone's house, isn't it? But in the original Greek, that's the exact same word he uses to describe the Christmas story. There was no space for them in the guest room. We look at the image up here of what a first century Israelite home generally looked like. This is from our architect, Lane Redmeyer. He cuts a couple parts of the ceiling away so we can see into the rooms. You see this big room up here? It's a big open room. This is what's called a kataluma, or as we would call it in our house, the guest room. All right? Typically it's on the second floor, and much like the American South today, the Israelite culture is our seniors get preference. So who's probably up there? The old folks. They get preference. All these folks coming into Bethlehem, they get preference. See, your ox, your donkey, your cow, these animals are your livelihood. If the thief takes your animals, if the wild animal kills them, guess what? Your ability to feed your family just disappeared. And off the courtyard, and a lot of these homes on the hillsides are built around natural caves. So, if you have a cave, you'll use it. If not, you build a room. You build a room, you have a big thick wall, and you have it's called a fenestrated wall. That's a fancy way to say a big thick wall with open windows. There's no glass, open windows, and this is where you put the animals. Of course, you got to feed those animals, so what do you put in the window sills? And Priscilla asked, what was that? The answer is your manger. Yeah. So when we think of the manger, this is what we're talking about. We often have the wood feed trough, and so we have the wood feed trough in our mind, but generally it's stone. Now there's a replica of one on the table over there. We're not going to walk over there, but if you see the fancy decorated box, that is a replica of a first century ossuary, one of the most famous ones. That's actually a replica of Caiaphas, the high priest from the trial of Jesus. You don't know if you knew his burial box was found. But here's what we do. We pull it out, we take the lid off. Curtis, we're going to gather his bones together, and we're going to put them in the box. We don't lay them out like a coffin, we put it in. Guess what? Grandma and Grandpa might already be in there. Cousin Fred too, Mom or Dad. The biblical term, gathered to your fathers, is literal. Okay? Now, in the first century, the time of Jesus, is a real short window in history when this practice is being used. In the biblical King's period, there was like I'm forgetting the term, an area where the bones go in, under the slab, okay? So, the interesting thing though is when we describe the burial of Jesus, what are they doing? They're putting him on a slab. It is the same kind of tomb. So, sometimes I hear people say really silly stuff like, the Gospels were written hundreds of years after the account. There are thousands of reasons that is ludicrous.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of proofs, they're first century documents. But one of my favorite simple things to talk about is the burial of Jesus, the description. Whoever's writing it clearly understands the tomb situation. This is ossuary burial. But the problem is he don't hang around a year, okay? But this is what the style of tomb is described as a new tomb. Now, if it's written 200 or 300 years later, guess what? It's a different burial practice. The author wouldn't know. But anyway, so we wait a year, we come back, we put his tones in the box. So I tell this big long story to understand that, and I point out the replica over there just so I can show you this square box, in this case, that is no replica. This is an authentic first century ossuary. Curtis, are you going to fit in there?
Negative.
Negative. All right. What is this? It's a baby's ossuary from first century Judea. All right. So this is for the bones of a baby. The lid is long missing. It is the real thing. The government of Israel do not let these leave anymore. Maybe if you're at the Met in New York, you could get one on loan. Tommy Chamberlain from the University of Pikeville, no way. The only reason we have one is it's in the collection of our museum, Michigan, our museum partner in Michigan, and they've allowed us to borrow it. But this is burial practice in the 1st century. It is a rare object to get to see here in the United States, so we're really proud to have it on display. If you look at the front of it, the reason I put a little light on it is it has artwork. Okay, so be sure to look at the artwork. You can see it really good in the picture. I like that story. Now, here we have an ancient Roman spearhead. Imagine it on a long shaft. Of course, that's what the soldier pierces his side and blood and water come out. Maybe it's something like this. In the back, we find a gold coin of Tiberius Caesar. Now, there is the account of the soldiers. I think it's in Matthew, that the guards were given a large amount of money, a large sum of money to say, hey, his disciples stole his body from the tomb. Now, the text doesn't tell us what the denominations were. Most historians probably the gold coins of the Caesar at the time. And here's what's interesting: we talked about the Tiberius Caesar denarius back there, the silver coin. That coin is worth 1 day's wage for the average day labor. Okay, so it's worth a whole day's wage. The gold coin here, 25 days' wage. If it's a small sack of these, this is not weekend money. These men's lives have just changed. It is life-changing money. Now, you know, for most people throughout history, life-changing money will also affect your story you're going to tell. Right? Now, the one main thing we want to point out in this case is the nail. What is interesting about it is if you're familiar with the remains of a crucifixion victim, I believe his name is Jehoiadan, the nail is still in the body, in the bones, and because of that, we know what size nail the Romans are using to crucify people. So when we were looking for this exhibit, Dr. Stripping helped us found a specific size ancient Roman nail, and it's this one on display. It's the right lift, and this is the size of a crucifixion nail. What's interesting is I always picture it through the palm of the hand, and that's how we always do it on the artwork. I see Priscilla shaking her head no. She knows where we're going with this. Well, modern studies have taught us they actually won't work. It'll rip. The weight won't work. See, the wrist is considered part of the hand in the ancient world. We have two bones here, and if we drive the nail between the bones, it will hold the weight. Okay? Now there's a problem with this if you're the person getting the nail drove into you. You also have to drive it through a nerve.